Right. I've just come from the Budget Scrutiny Committee, which is an unfortunate clash, so I missed your introduction, Minister. Well, I heard some of it, but I didn't hear all of it, so apologies for that. But we had Professor Niamh Maloney there discussing this consultation that they're going to have, this Taxation and Welfare Commission. And I thought it was just an interesting contrast in a way, because she is, their group are trying to step back from the taxation system and have a strategic look at what we're trying to do in terms of the taxation and welfare systems, what we're trying to achieve, and to get wider public opinion into big questions about what is the purpose of our tax system, what is the strategic direction of it. And I think that is a very welcome development, that we should do that, because I think all too often, and understandably, this is not necessarily a criticism, but all too often in a finance bill, we've lots of bitty things, and it's difficult and it's quite technical, it's a big bill, and you don't really see how it all knits together into an overall sort of strategic direction for tax in particular that it deals with in the finance bill. But sorry, it's okay. I'll use this mic. I just didn't realise that it was this mic that's on. Sorry, it's fine. No, I'll use this one. And equally, even with a budget can often be reacting to, and again, understandably, to individual pressures at a particular point in time, rather than taking an overall strategic look. Now, I kind of want to start with that point, because it seems to me that we never do that, right? And in the week that's in it, with COP being discussed, more than ever, we need to do it. And I think the discussion around the climate emergency and the radical measures we need to take in order to address that climate emergency give added weight to arguments that we've been making from the left for many, many years about wealth and income redistribution, in terms of the concentration of wealth controlled by corporations, and a relatively small number of billionaires that control those corporations, and very, very wealthy people who tend to control a disproportionate amount of wealth and income in this society and in societies right across the world. And we have to ask the question, I think, in the context of climate change, is it possible to address the climate emergency if we don't do something about the grossly unequal distribution of wealth in our society? And I would say the answer is absolutely no chance. No chance at all that you will do it. And we need to think about that from a strategic point of view. I mean, first of all, it should be a statement of the obvious, right? And this is apparent when you look at things like carbon tax and some of the measures that were in the budget, and the reaction to those sorts of things from the less well-off, how people see it. They see climate action as a threat, as an economic and financial threat to them. And the right, insofar as even the SRI say things like carbon tax, are regressive. Now, you will say you're taking countermeasures to kind of obviate that. But I can tell you it is simply a fact that the less well-off see climate measures like carbon tax, and in my opinion, rightly at the moment, but either way, perceive them to be a threat. Now, they shouldn't, and we're going to lose the battle if that is the case. But it's also the case, if you think about when you think about the massive investment we need to make the transition to address the climate crisis, who actually has the wealth and resources to do it? Well, the answer we know, with the concentration of wealth in the world. You know, with the figures that are repeated year after year and become more obscene and staggering year after year in terms of the concentration of wealth in the hands of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and, you know, Elon Musk, and, you know, you can go through the list of these spectacularly wealthy individuals who have, you know, staggering amounts of profit that grow and grow and grew during the COVID pandemic. And of course the fossil fuel companies and so on. But you think about data centers, Right? That's all the Jeff Bezoses and all these people. You know, I used to think the cloud was something that was up there. And then you just heard, actually, the cloud is a warehouse out on the Naas Road, which is pumping out huge amounts of CO2 emissions to make money for Jeff Bezos, right? And these people are doing things that are destroying the environment. They control massive amounts of wealth. Governments are frightened of them in terms of we daren't impose a bit of extra tax on them in case they run away. But they are a problem, right? Those things are a problem in terms of addressing climate action, and we're afraid to even think about taking some of their profit off them in order to get the funds that we need to make the massive investment in the areas that we need to address climate change. Right? That's a problem. And you could go through the list of the big industries and corporations, the fossil fuel companies being another obvious example, right, who have no interest in addressing the climate crisis, none. So if we don't wrest some of that money off them, we are not going to have the resources to make the massive upfront investment you need in public transport, in the development of renewable energy, in the massive retrofit program we need in housing. I won't exhaust the list. Forestry, and so on, biodiversity measures that we need to address the crisis, right? Because they control all that wealth. Now, I always thought that inequality in wealth distribution was obscene and gross, but it seems to me now you simply cannot talk about addressing the climate emergency unless you talk about redistribution of the wealth. And, you know, and that's where the sort of the micro measures then come into view, right? I mean, to use the examples of that you used in your tax policy changes in the budget. You said most people would be better off in the budget, right? Most people would be better off. But then you actually explained in your own budget book and with your comments about inflation how that is absolutely not true. You pointed rightly to the fact that inflation would be 3.7%, possibly higher. And then you look at the examples. I gave them in a speech after the budget, but just to give them again. You mentioned Rowan and Nicole as a case study, who will get USC changes that will be to the value of 0.45% of their net income, €165 in the year. That's what they will get from the USC changes you introduced. That's a couple who are getting €40,000, about average income. And then you mentioned Mairead, who's on 30,000. I picked these two examples because those are kind of, median to average industrial earnings, who will get 0.5%, €115 over the course of the year, right? Now, 0.5% increase as a result of budget changes against an inflation rate of 3.7%, which you yourself pointed to, does not mean they end up better off. It means they end up worse off. And when you look at energy costs, even before the carbon tax, in terms of several energy price hikes, then you look at bin charges going up, and not only is it wiped out, but there's a net loss in income, I would argue. And then you look at rents continuing to rise, the cost of that. So actually people are losing out. But on the other side, we know that corporate profits, the people I mentioned, this is where it relates to the big picture, increased dramatically during the year, right? And have consistently done so for the last 10 years. In our budget submission, we set out the table. 2012, gross corporate profits, 74 billion. 2020, 203 billion. Extraordinary, right? Extraordinarily. That's a 127% increase in profits in under a decade. How much do they pay? In 2020, the corporations, and this is mostly the Bezoses, the Gateses, the Microsofts of the world, how much tax do they pay? 11 billion on 203 billion. Now contrast that with the PAYE, workers and the self-employed. How much did they earn in 2021? 130 billion. Just now, bear these figures in mind. Corporations last year, 203 billion, paid 11 billion in tax. Workers, all of them, nearly 2 million of them or more, earned between them 130 billion. How much tax did they pay? 27 billion. More than twice what the corporations paid in absolute terms on a little bit over half of the income between them, right? That is extraordinary. So it's not a slogan to say the rich are getting richer and the poor and the workers are getting poorer. That's a fact when you look at those figures. They're absolutely stunning. And what we're looking at in this bill then is some more reliefs for them, more tax reliefs, but workers getting less than nothing when you take into account inflation. And that accumulation of wealth for the rich is borne out again in the CSO. I mean, I now love the central bank. I love the central bank quarterly reports now when they come out because they actually show the accumulation of wealth in this country. And again, it is absolutely extraordinary. The net worth of households in this country is now at a record high of 883 billion euro net worth. That is up 89 billion in 1 year, the year of COVID. Now, do the vast majority of workers feel out there that they have seen a massive increase in their household wealth? They don't feel it because it hasn't happened. But the central bank doesn't lie. Somebody has seen a massive increase in their wealth. And of course, your own department a few years ago, and you should do this more often in my opinion, showed the distribution of wealth. The top 10% have 53% of that wealth. The bottom 50% have less than 2% of that wealth. So we know who got the massive increase in their wealth last year. The top 10%. Absolutely extraordinary. The top 5%, who are 85,000 households, who have wealth on average of about 3 million euro each, when you break down the figures, have between them 331 billion euro. Right? It's mind-boggling. It's so mind-boggling that people just couldn't even believe it. But it's a fact. Oh, it's a fact. The central bank reports don't lie. They don't lie. This is from the central bank quarterly report at the beginning of this year, Bernard. So you can say what you like. It's true. It's true. Or here's a more down-to-earth example. But what does the finance bill not do? It doesn't get rid of SARP, Special Assignee Relief Programme. And honestly, when people hear about this, and still not enough people really know about it, it is really a shocker. And the Minister, thanks Minister, but a genuine thanks for giving me the figures and the details on it. You sent a paper out on it recently. But in the last available year we had in our budget, so I don't know what it was last year, but in the year before that it was 42 million, was it? 42 million, the cost of a special assignee relief programme, a tax relief only available to people who earn more than 70,000 euro a year. Up to €1 million a year, although even if you earn more than that, you still get it. And the Minister's figures helpfully showed that, for example, there's 50 people who earn more than €1 million are benefiting from this tax relief. Now imagine a tax relief that is only given to the highest income earners that earn more than 70,000, 50 of whom earn more than $1 million, and a handful of whom earn more than $3 million in a year, and they get a tax break, which includes credits to send their kids to private schools. I mean, come on, that is just totally unjustifiable. And yet we continue it. So my point is, Minister, we have to start to talk about redistribution of wealth, right? We should do it on equity and fairness and justice grounds, but in the context of the climate emergency, and indeed if we're to learn anything from the COVID emergency, another existential thing that has happened to us in the last year, it is if we're going to build the capacity in our health service that we need, if we're going to have the proper, ventilated schools that aren't overcrowded classrooms, all the things we should have learned, we're going to need massive, massive investment in all of these key areas of infrastructure and services, way beyond the amount that is currently being invested in them or even envisaged in the National Development Plan, and it's simply, in my opinion, not going to happen unless you start to redistribute some of that enormous accumulation of wealth and profits that's happening at the top, and close down the extraordinary amount of loopholes, whether it's the SARP for the top executives or the really big loopholes that you have in the corporate tax area, in areas like capital allowances, intragroup transactions, amalgamations and reconstructions, capital allowances brought forward, research and development tax credits, group relief, knowledge development box, the total of which, just those ones I've mentioned, tax reliefs cost, again this is from the revenue figures, cost 17 billion last year. 17 billion in a cost to the Exchequer. That's how it's described in the revenue. Imagine that. Imagine they didn't get all that and we had 17 billion to put into education, health, housing and so on. It would make a big, big, big difference, in my opinion. Okay, just on some specific things that are mentioned in the budget, or in the finance bill. So I've said why I think the USC increases against changes in that background are absolutely miserable and derisory. The Help to Buy scheme, I don't think it should have stayed in. I think it's just chasing a market that's out of control. You will say it's helping people to buy, but it's helping people to buy grossly inflated houses rather than deal with the problem of prices that are out of control. And I think it's actually contributing to price rises. You have mentioned the residential zoned land tax. I mean, you know, one of the things, Minister, that drives people absolutely rightly crazy about the housing crisis is the amount of empty property that is sitting around doing nothing. This doesn't apply to that. Habitable property is not taxed under this at all. Right? It's only zoned land. And it's only 3% less than the vacant site tax, which was 7%. Now, I know it's going to cover, I think, a wider group of people, I think, but it's, that is not a disincentive when you look at the capital appreciation of property at the moment, of zoned property that they can sit on and so on. It's racing ahead of that. It's not going to be a disincentive to land hoarding and speculation, and it doesn't cover a lot of the thing that really drives people mad, which is the empty property sitting around in towns and villages all over the place. We need punitive vacant property taxes. The 10% on the residential stamp duty change, where you've made a change, I think, where if they buy more than 10 units but agree to lease it within 2 years now, so they have a 2-year waiting time, where you won't slap the 10% on them. I mean, that's another let-off for them. So they can buy up an estate, these vulture funds or cuckoo funds or whatever you can, buy it up, see if they can flog it off at the prices that will make them the most profit, but if they can't manage that, then they can knock on the local authority's door 2 years later and say, here, listen, will you lease it off us? And then they'll get backdated the reduction in the stamp duty. That's, to my mind, crazy and fairly criminal. The extension of the bank levy, well, yes, it should be extended, but why do Bank of Ireland and KBC get off the hook? Or is it actually, because a lot of their business is going to be transferred to the pillar banks, is it actually AIB, Permanent TSB and Bank of Ireland who get off the hook? But either way, that is a dramatic reduction in the amount of money we're getting from the bank levy, when in fact the customers out there and the business will be the same. 2 banks have decided to pull out, but the business will be the same, and actually less of a levy is going to be imposed on the banking sector. There's so many other things I wanted to ask. I do want to ask about Section 481, Minister, which I saw you mention. I mean, I'll just say this, okay? Despite the changes you brought in, and I welcome them on foot of, representations that were made to you, issues I brought to you, the film producer companies who are getting Section 481 this week, or last week in fact, but every week on a regular basis, are going into the WRC and saying, these people who did work on their film productions are not my employees, I have no responsibility. They're still doing it. Now, I wish somebody from the department or revenue or somebody would go down to the WRC and say, sorry, you got Section 481, you are the employer, you are responsible for these people, stop denying that you are. Right? But that's what's happening. And something has to be done about that. And now we're going to have a similar relief for the gaming sector and so on. And I'm for encouraging the gaming sector and the employment to come from it, but it has to be tied to strict conditions in terms of quality employment and proper employment, not the sort of stuff that is going on in the film industry. And maybe you can explain, I'm sorry to just, maybe you can explain the change to 481 in terms of labour-only services. I'm a bit worried about that, frankly. I don't know what it means. Maybe you can explain where that came from, who lobbied for it, and what precisely it means, because what I hope it doesn't mean is that essentially people who are not directly employed, but instead are sort of contractors, which is what the producers are trying to do. They don't want to take responsibility for employees directly. Well, they can write that off as eligible expenditure. There should be nothing, and maybe this isn't it, that incentivises bogus self-employment or not employing people directly in the film industry.
That concludes the